I saw this paper today. I want to make a quick video about it because it's a question that I've had, and I think a lot of people have had for a long time. And this is a systematic review of a lot of literature on the proportion of SARS-CoV-2 infections that are asymptomatic. So one of the main reasons that people have had lockdowns and, we're asking people to wear masks and, doing all this social distancing and all that is because we suspect that there's a large proportion of people that are asymptomatic yet able to spread the virus. So the reason that's important is, let's say that you couldn't spread this virus until you were symptomatic. If that were the case, it would be very easy to just isolate and quarantine the people that are symptomatic and just let everyone else go about their business. And, we wouldn't have to do all the things that we're doing now, because you're like, oh, you have a fever and you're coughing. Well, now you isolate yourself and stay away from people. But the problem is that there's like a lag period where people are pre-symptomatic and they have no symptoms, but they're still shedding virus. And there's some people that are asymptomatic, they have no symptoms and they're still shedding virus and infecting other people. And so the question is this just like a very small number of people, or is it a large number of people? Because if it's really, really tiny, like 0 or nothing, then, it's probably something we don't need to worry about. And there hasn't, there's been a lot of studies, suggesting the numbers of people that are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. And this paper tries to aggregate all the previous information and kind of come up with a good idea of what that number is. So what they did is they just looked at all the papers that they found. So they found 61 eligible studies. And 43 of them used PCR testing, so that's the swab in the nose, and then 18 used antibody testing, so they just checked the blood to see if they had antibodies against it, and if they have antibodies, you figure they had it at some point, they were infected at some point. And then the studies, and so they were looking for studies that had a lot of people and were hopefully longitudinal, so they followed them over time, because if you just follow them at one point, then you don't know, are they pre-symptomatic, like you just caught them in the incubation phase of the disease, or they truly asymptomatic, they never developed any symptoms. So let's look at their data. So here's their data. I don't know how well this shows up. This is very small print here, and I really couldn't make it. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Yeah, larger. Good. Okay, I made it too big. So England, they kind of randomly surveyed like 1 million people, and they found out that 0.3% of them were positive, but 47% of them had no symptoms. So this is not longitudinal. They just sampled them at one point. So this is random sampling, which is good. You want random sampling if you want to be able to extrapolate the data to everyone else. Longitudinal data would have been nice, because then you could see. So what this says is, at the time they tested these people, 47% of them were not symptomatic. Now, a certain percentage of these people were in the incubation phase, and they're going to turn symptomatic. And we just don't know how many of those they are, because they didn't capture the data. They had no longitudinal data. So they had another large study out of Belgium where they tested like 250,000 people. And this was not random sampling, because this is in long-term care facilities, so nursing homes and staff. So that's not a random sample of the population. It's just the people in the nursing homes and staff. And they did not follow them longitudinally. So they found out that 3% of them, so obviously we know that nursing home and staff people were higher rates of infection. So the general population in England at the time of the study was 0.3% positive. Here it's 3% positive. And 74% of these were asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. They did not follow them longitudinally, so they don't know. This one, U.S. skilled nursing facility residents, they checked 22,000 people. This was longitudinal. They checked them over time. And then in this case, 40%. So anyway, if you look down these numbers, they get like 40%, 90%, 27%. But most of these didn't have good longitudinal data or random sampling. There was none that was yes longitudinal and yes random sampling. That would have been the ideal study, but not here. So the better study is this study, and they found the ones where they did antibody testing. So antibody testing, even though that there is one point in time when they're testing it, it's retrospective, and you can ask the people, did you ever have symptoms? So they found out in this, again, the UK did the large study, like a third of a million people, 400,000 people. It was a random sample. They tested this many people, and they found out 5% of them had antibodies. So they seemingly were exposed and built antibodies against the virus, about 5% of them, so 17,000. And when you ask them, when you ask these people, how many of you had symptoms, a third of them said they never had any symptoms. Same thing in Spain. Spain did a similar large study, and they had similar results. 5% were positive, so 5% positive here, 5% positive here, and about 33% were asymptomatic. So they take this as the best data, and I believe them. That seems like very good data. And their conclusion is probably about 33% of COVID infections are asymptomatic. That seems to line up with the SIREN study, which we talked about in a previous video, which I think this is a great study that's going to answer a lot of questions. In that study, they had about 12 plus 17% that did not have COVID symptoms. So if you add those two together, 29% were, quote, asymptomatic. And then in the reinfections, 34% were asymptomatic. So their conclusion in this paper matches up pretty well with the conclusions, the preliminary conclusions of the SIREN paper. So it seems like that is a pretty good number to peg it at. So now I think we have pretty good information that the percentage of people that have asymptomatic infections is 33%.